Hello, hi, and welcome. You are now viewing or listening to a Quincy T. Strathclyde production. Uh, this is my second video so far, and what I wanted to start working towards is just kind of like integrating some projects that I've already done to have a little bit more content to work with. And what I want to focus on today is like the direction that I think Crusader Kings 3 is going to be like moving towards. Uh Many of you obviously don't know because I'm still a new content creator. I'm actually a huge Crusader Kings fan, and I have been for like since I was a teenager. I played the fuck out of some Crusader Kings 2, getting well in excess of like 1,000 hours, probably closer to two. It was just like one of my obsessions, just because like I get interested into a lot of like historical content, and also just like having that kind of like role play aspect going into history just makes it like really compelling. And also just I like role playing games in general, and Crusader Kings is one of the better ones. Like people like to think of it as like a grand strategy game because it like has a map that you're painting, but it's a role playing game like pretending to be a grand strategy game. Let's be real about this. You play as characters with stats who do things in the world, uh, and they're just saving on the animation budget by putting it as like an Excel spreadsheet that you're painting. Um, and it's like even like when comparing it to like Europa Universalis 4 or upcoming 5 at time of recording on September 28th of 2025, or Victoria 2 or 3. It's just not as focused on like the big like grand scale numbers of nation building, because at the end of the day you're playing as like a medieval person managing your personal like estate, and that's very historical. And I also like that, it gives you the opportunity to humanize people who live in the past by playing them. Uh, but I'll save another day for like the kind of love letter that I want to give to Crusader Kings. Uh, I right now I'm just wanting to integrate a essay that I wrote on Medium a few months ago, back in July. That was mostly just this was after All Under Heaven had been like revealed, though it still hasn't come out as of the date of release. You may be seeing this in the future, and it may have already come out. But at the time of recording and the time when I wrote this article back in July, All Under Heaven hadn't come out yet. I believe the most recent DLC, well, now it's Coronations, but we don't count Coronations. It's dog shit. But going back was Lords of the Steppe, I think it was called, which basically just integrated like a DLC from Crusader Kings 2 that was primarily focused on like creating a unique gameplay loop for playing like characters in the steppe. And I have like my own, I don't know. I think like the way that Crusader Kings 2 did it was a bit imperfect, because it kind of like focuses on like the historical fallacy of seeing steppe peoples in their relation to the settled peoples that they were primarily raiding from, and in some cases like conquering. But I'll talk about like how I feel about like the depictions of Central Asian and nomadic people in general in a different video. Back to this essay. This essay that I wrote was primarily talking about like where do we go from here? Because like nobody like a lot of people felt back in like 2020 whenever they revealed like the map in Crusader Kings 3 was like ripped on the edge, on the eastern side, and people thought like, oh, like maybe they're going to expand into Asia, and I mean everybody wanted them to do that, obviously. But now like we're 5 years in, and there's a bit of anxiety because like now they're adding like probably the largest DLC they've probably ever done, for almost any Paradox game, just because like the whole region that they're adding could have been a game in and of itself. It is the game in some, like, these overhaul mods that people are making on the Steam Workshop. And so, like, there's this question, like, so much of the game is still, like, not finished. It's not as in-depth as people, like, would want it to be, and it doesn't come close to the amount of options that you would have, like, in a real medieval life simulator that Crusader Kings has the pretense of being. So what I wanted to do was to kind of, like, point, where do we go next? I guess if you are a Paradox, like, person, or you know someone in Paradox, you could send them this video and we could just, like, have a conversation about, like, the future of the game, and at least, like, what I think might be coming next and what would be, like, good additions into the game. So, like, as of right now, Crusader Kings 3 has been released for about 5 years, so, you know, something that almost everyone knows, everyone who's interested in the game. And there's been some pretty, like, good amounts of, like good DLC that has been released. There's been some stuff that's been a little, like, underwhelming. Like, there was the Northern Lords, I think it was what it was called, focused on, like, Scandinavian people and their culture, and that was, like, a little underwhelming because it was primarily focused on, like, one group of people. You know, the Vikings, the Danes, the Swedes, and the Norwegians, or, you know, Norse, going back even further. And the Finns, to a lesser extent. The Sami people didn't really get a whole lot of focus there. It was primarily focused on, like, the northern Germanic peoples. And I mean, like, it makes sense that Paradox, a Swedish studio, would want to focus on, like, Sweden and the area around Sweden, like, as the first DLC. But it did kind of just make the Vikings, like, overpowered for quite some time, just because they were, like, the most developed people in Northern Europe. Like, from a mechanical perspective, there was just more stuff for them to do. And something that I kind of want to touch on before we progress is that, like, Crusader Kings 2 was a very, like, full game. It had years of life, and there was, like, there was dozens of DLC that had been gradually released, like, over, like, probably every, like, 4 to 6 months. Like, there was a lot going on in that game, especially by the end there in, like, 2019. I remember when they released Holy Fury, and I was actually really mad about it at the time because I had almost gotten the Saushant achievement playing as, like, the Karen Satrapi in, like, the 7-something start date. And I was so close to getting that achievement, and then they released Holy Fury, and it fucked my run. I couldn't use it to get the achievement. I'm still kind of mad about it. But, I mean, I guess I could go back and get it now, but it's not like they're going to update it anytime soon. I'm still kind of mad, because I don't want to do that again. I think so many things had to go right for that run to work. But, setting that aside, like, Crusader Kings 2 was a very full game, and it was not afraid to be goofy with it, to do things that were not historically accurate, to make a more fun role-playing game. Like the secret societies, the satanic stuff, the Sunset Invasion. Like, there was a lot of stuff going on that just was not historically, like, on the table or real in any meaningful sense of the word. And that was fine. That gave Crusader Kings 2, like, a very unique feel, made it very fun to play. But 3 is, like, really a lot more committed to that realism, and I think, like, both have their value. But there are some things that Crusader Kings 2 had in the game that were more realistic, like Sword of Islam, like the Nomad Lord DLC, I don't remember the name of it specifically, like Holy Fury, that were kind of, like, rooted in history, like, even if they were still, like, gamifying it. And, like, some of it, Sword of Islam, obviously, some of it made it into the base release of Crusader Kings 3. But other stuff, like the Steppe Lords, like, just didn't get in. It just didn't get in. and the stuff you can tell like what they were going to release new DLC about by like what they left out. And I honestly was kind of hoping back in 2020 that they were going to be re-releasing their new versions of that content first before like deepening the game as it existed, if that makes sense. And they really didn't do that. They really focused on like kind of like trying to make Crusader Kings stand on its own, like separate from 2 before they started revisiting old content that had become part of like the pretty standard gameplay loop of Crusader Kings 2. So like since we're talking about like the direction that the DLC has gone in Crusader Kings 3, as something that's like, you know, as we've established, more grounded in history, even if not purely historical. Like let's kind of like grasp where we're at right now. Like the latest line of the new DLCs and like the current crop yet to release like is all under heaven, as we've discussed. And you know, it like those who have been following, you probably know it wants to expand like the map like to pretty much all of Asia. Like so we get like all of like Eurasia and then like Africa down to the Sahel. And it adds like also Indonesia as well, and Japan. Basically like everything from like, so we'll get everything from like Iceland all the way down to like Java. Like the game is gonna be fucking huge after it comes out. And like it's gonna, the only thing it's really gonna leave out is like Northeast Siberia. And while there was like stuff going on there's stuff going on fucking everywhere throughout history. Like that, it's not like super relevant to what we're going to be doing in Asia generally, since a lot of the focus is on like China, on Japan, on Cambodia, and you know the Javan kingdoms as well. I do genuinely, sincerely hope that we're going to get like more content for India, because India is like super relevant, especially like because it's a massive fucking place, you know? There was a whole lot of stuff going on, and it was super culturally relevant to Southeast Asia as well, just because like China and India were kind of like both exporting their culture to Southeast Asia, and that's why it's such an interesting place today. With you know, like Myanmar/Burma being more influenced by India, whereas Vietnam is more influenced by China, in large part because China did like a lot more to like spread their culture and their like organizational philosophy to Vietnam. Because I mean, like going back hundreds and hundreds of years, there used to be the kingdom of Champa. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which was a Hindu kingdom in southern Vietnam that was like destroyed by the northern kingdom that would become Vietnam. But I'm getting off topic again. Like all Under Heaven is gonna be huge, and it's like easily the most ambitious thing that Paradox has probably ever done with one of their games. And while I think like that ultimately like should be commended, like we want like good ambitious projects. No? Oh, that's a cricket. Sorry, my cat was playing with a dead cricket. It will probably result in a bigger workload for a lot of the Paradox guys, and that I'm worried about, because now they have to worry about like updating these regions in Asia that they've added, and I worry that like areas that are still pretty underdeveloped, like for instance West Africa, are going to stay as underdeveloped as they were like pretty near launch. And it seems like after All Under Heaven comes out, like the team is going to be winding down and focusing on like easier projects generally, and I think like that's like perfectly acceptable. I see absolutely no problem with that, and I do think it's worth talking about like what is probably going to be coming next. like, since they're gonna be making stuff that's like a bit easier to put together, they could probably put together in like less time than it took to make All Under Heaven. So it's gonna be primarily focused on like mechanical changes and additions rather than like map expansions or map micro divisions, like adding more counties in particular places, new buildings, stuff like that. And since recently, a few months ago, they released a survey that I participated in, Paradox did, to basically see, like, gauge interest in where the game might be going. And based on what they were talking about in that survey, kind of hints, like, to me, where the game is probably going to be going over the next few years. And that's something that I kind of want to discuss here. We've been shown hints that over the next year or two, Crusader Kings 3 is probably going to be adding merchants and merchant republics, using like a lot of like other established mechanics like adventurers and tours and tournaments, to basically like have your character be kind of traveling around as like a merchant lord and like buying products and selling them in other places, making money that way, and then being able to like run in like mercantile republican governance like in Venice, like in the Hanseatic League, like in Genoa, and hopefully that'll lead into like other like more, I won't say purely democratic, more democratic governance that was common at the time, like what was going on in Milan and Florence for a time. So while merchants and republics are almost certainly what's going to be coming like immediately after All Under Heaven, probably like in the 6 to 8 months after that comes out. After that, it seems a bit hazier. Like they haven't like fully like concretized, if that's a word, like what's going to be coming after that. Theocracies like the Papal States, and or more development on like being a feudal vassal or like a courtier, as like an unlanded courtier, being in a relationship with like the people in power around you. That seems like it's probably a direction they're going to be moving in. And so I want to share like what I suspect might come from a mercantile DLC and then start like moving forward from there. I suspect like a lot of it is going to focus on adventure gameplay where merchants move across the map, ferrying goods and selling them while doing like political drama on the side, which I'm excited for. And I would love to focus on like trade and stewardship for more traditionally feudal, clan, tribal, or administrative characters. I think you could have an interesting system where you can capture counties that like produce a certain good or crop and use that to build extra revenue through taxing the merchants who sell it and the people producing it. Merchants are taxed when they sell goods, then that appears as like a city republic tax for these larger lords, and like like the Norse established jarldoms and settlements in Iceland and Greenland to hunt seals and walruses, like showing how like the desire to capture production of a good influenced the habits of medieval aristocracy, because fundamentally these are people running in a state. Like the medieval family is an economic unit. And that's like what like these clans and families like who were the aristocracy were doing, is they were trying to like not just like secure their families like into the future, but make money. Money is security in the society, and it's also prestige because you can buy nice things and make other people jealous. You could also afford to hire like more help, be they the kind that swings swords or the kind that just kind of tosses out your chamber pot. But I'd like to enjoy seeing something where like the aristocracy can purchase these kinds of goods for benefits. It only makes sense that like the Sultan of Baghdad is going to import chai leaves from India, and he can use them for reducing stress, assisting in meditation if he follows a branch of Islam that has the meditation, and giving like a small benefit to health. Maybe like even a tiny benefit, so we're not getting a little overpowered with like these kinds of easy to import goods. But the further away that good is, because Iraq and India are pretty close together, you could probably like import those leaves like through the Persian Gulf, assuming you don't have like a super negative relationship with whoever controls Hormuz. But we'll get to that later. Like the farther away that good is, the more expensive acquiring a supply is going to be. up to the point where it's just impossible to acquire certain goods that can't be transported over long distances in a similar mechanic to diplomatic range. However, you could commission merchants or adventurers, similar to the old like adventure inspiration, which still technically exists, but it's like kind of it's not very good. Like, let's be real with ourselves here. It also just didn't make a whole lot of sense that they're just like, yes, I'm in like the Sahel and I'm sending a letter across the Sahara to reach my king using medieval technology. Like, I mean, like letters were just like not that reliable back then. Like that kind of like adventurism would not be like more common until like several hundred years later, once you start getting into like the age of exploration. Back to this. Like, so you could commission merchants or adventurers similar to the old adventure inspiration to acquire like goods for you at variable cost and dubious means, if applicable. Like, say, a British monarch in 1200 paying some freebooters to steal a quantity of tea from Tunis through banditry and piracy. There like will likely be some established trade routes with special benefits like the Silk Road, which we know is coming in All Under Heaven, or like the Trans-Saharan trade routes, which also existed in Crusader Kings 2, among other famous corridors. And you'll likely use similar mechanics to the travel system introduced in Tours and Tournaments, which is a staple of adventure gameplay, both to direct your character or their business enterprises. And, like, these could perhaps become, like, established trade routes if you did several things, like maintained a trade relationship for more than a decade, or if you did several things, maintained a trade relationship for more than a decade with a specific lord or market, built mercantile structures to make travel easier, like cabins for travelers in Scandinavia or Tibet if someone gets stuck in the winter. If you convince other merchants to likewise make the trip and invest in infrastructure, this might be too in-depth, but you could be able to establish relationships with people who have a tendency to raid caravans, such as like steppe peoples or desert peoples of the Sahara, and negotiate an agreement where your caravans are protected, or at least not bothered, in exchange for goods and money. And other merchants would have to pay you for a seal of passage to benefit from your arrangement. Naturally, you would charge them as much as they're willing to pay you, receive hooks, opinion bonuses if you charge them charitably. Of course, the same privilege could be pried from you with a hook. Or, alternatively, you would have to pay these royalties to them if they've already established this kind of thing, until you could secure the arrangement for yourself. As for like mercantile republics like Venice or Novgorod, in two famous examples, like I suspect much of their mechanics will borrow extensively from the administrative government and function, but have like some electioneering events and ways to sway votes better than exist in Scandinavian or Tanistry elective systems. And hopefully these events will transfer over to make those systems more dynamic. But the gameplay loop will likely focus extensively on like a combination of estate management and adventurer-esque merchant gameplay, where you travel or send envoys to acquire goods and then resell them in regions where those goods are in high demand. Your family should be able to establish like a mercantile empire, similar to how a lord establishes a feudal empire. Though, just like feudal empires, true monopoly with all of your competitors paying for the privilege of access to your market would be exceedingly difficult to maintain, especially over multiple generations. And it would most likely collapse after like a singular generation without like some really good roles on your heirs and like good pedagogy. Something else. These developments could allow for like great opportunities for piracy and bandit-related characters now that merchants are themselves characters in the world. And you could have trade routes that function similarly to how travel routes work from tours and tournaments, where the system could work for army supply. With army supply lines forming between the army and the closest allied or occupied territory, and disrupting the supply line with small mobile forces could give defenders in wars a way to kill like Goliath, a much larger army. And this could also defeat like the antiquated army supply system where armies are functionally self-sustainable up to a point, and it would make long-distance invasions just as difficult as they were historically. The Crusades would have to immediately capture a port and maintain like protection of that port, or some adventurer mercenaries or brigands could easily cut off the supply coming into the army and make a lot of money doing that, similar to Harvard the Wake's unique content, which was added with the adventurer stuff. And to be honest, like all of that is like probably the full extent of what I think we can reasonably expect and hope for from a like mercantile DLC. And there's a few other things like I want to pitch, like moving forward, because now we're going to territory of just kind of things that I would really like to see as someone who's like a major veteran of the game, and some stuff that was like kind of like I don't know alluded to in the survey, just from paying close attention. And I want to start with something related to the mercantile stuff, thinking about ways to expand stewardship and learning, to an extent, related gameplay in interesting ways. Right now, like, stewardship is less roleplay oriented and more hard numbers oriented. And that's mostly fine. Like, I'm sure that, like, the merchant material will give us more stewardship related roleplay, but there's a real opportunity to fundamentally change the way stewardship and learning and other skill sets don't really account for. An idea that I had, essentially, was what if a character with a lot of resources and control over holdings, aka not an unlanded character, had an opportunity to spend a large amount of money, prestige, and time to terraform a territory using like techniques available to them at the time with a bit of what's speculatively possible. Let me explain. Say you're the Emir of Yamad, you know, in like Oman. On the like southeastern coast of Arabia. Your realm is desert mountains or coastal desert, and that's going to hurt attempts at development no matter how much you invest in desert agriculture. Your focus will almost always go beyond your realm rather than providing you opportunities to play tall with the cards that you have. So you make a bunch of money, and you can use that to create salt marshes and mangrove forests, which can be harvested for wood and provide some income also from fishing. Like, what if you could discover oases and dig irrigation tracts to create floodplains? Like, that would provide, like, completely new ways of playing tall. And it would also give a ruler a way to literally leave their mark on the map, with the map being physically different after their passing. Mega projects like this would likely last decades, and require multiple rounds of investment offset or sped up by a combination of stewardship and learning. The terraforming could be used in other ways as well than just county development. Say you're a sultan of Africa, maybe playing as the Aghlabids. You have a character with high learning and stewardship after reading Livy's account of Hannibal Barca's war elephants. Your Lord of Tunis decides they want to emulate those ancient Tunisians, with the obvious wrinkle that North African elephant is extinct even by the earliest start date of 867 for about 500 years. So you have three possible ways to broach this. You could pay exorbitant amounts of money to transport bush elephant calves across the Sahara, and through many generations of careful breeding and training, create a subspecies docile enough to be used in the way those people of far-off India use their elephants. Those unfit for mounts could be released, or they could be hunted and become an occasional problem that you have to deal with as they get into crops or destroy property. You could do a terraforming project and find a remote valley in the Atlas Mountains that has with some irrigation and dedicated planting efforts, will become a micro-jungle and a rainforest over the course of many years. You can pay an exorbitant sum to transport Indian elephants and hire mahouts and move them into the valley where you keep a stable population to be your war elephants. And you'd be able to create a unit of war elephants, men-at-arms, from that. Though cultures in the region would have to learn the innovation to likewise be able to access the population and repeat your project with the ease of you having done the hardest part for them. And you could sell off breeding pairs or keep them jealously to yourself, like silkworms, before they eventually leak out several generations later, timed with the rate of regional innovation. Alternatively, you could declare this as too difficult and expensive and give up on your project. And there's a small chance you get an event or your spy master or steward finds a peasant telling tall tales about giant beasts from a remote valley in the Atlas Mountains. And so you go on a quest to find a possible last surviving population of North African elephants hidden away from the world, much like a legendary beast sighting with hunts. And finding them would let you protect them and bring them back from the very bleeding edge of extinction to get your war elephants. Terraforming could also be used offensively, where a ruler could salt the earth of rival rulers to create a desert or a wasteland buffer zone, to make it very difficult to recover after a war, and also act as an impediment to moving armies in future wars. And the similar to what like Rome did to Carthage, allegedly historically, and say that like you're like an Islamic sultanate in Iberia, in Spain, and you get into a war with like one of the Christian kingdoms descended from the Visigoths, Castile, Leon, Navarra, like Asturleon, Galicia, and like you barely win the war, and you really don't want them to be a problem in the future, so you just start salting the territory that you have access to. It basically means like that territory is going to be like downright worthless to you if you ever do conquer it, but it also means like the people who are stuck with it are going to have like a significantly harder time doing anything with it, making them just less of a threat because they have less to work with. It's going to require like a truly like significant amount of effort to like just return that to working order. But I kind of want to like use this idea, like what is actually like important about being a noble in this period of time, like with the economic development of this like period of human history. There's another aspect, like Crusader Kings really needs reform in this area. In the pre-modern period, the singular most important thing in every society, the thing that consumed every waking moment of a great deal of the human species, including the nobility that we play, food. It's food. In CK3, food isn't really a consideration, despite this being the foundation of the world economy in the period that you are playing. And the reason why you want land, ostensibly being an increase in your arable land that you grant or rent out in the vast majority of cases. In fact, the only time that food is really brought up as a gameplay mechanic is for the feast activity, and the gluttonous comfort eater and inapetic traits. This is something that absolutely needs remedying for like a more accurate and authentic medieval experience. Like, while development as a stat prioritizes and roughly captures how much economic activity, and therefore populated, a county is, we only recently like acquired a way to measure the arability of a land in the form of county fertility, introduced in Cons of the Steppe. I remembered it! I think this mechanic like should be expanded to sedentary peoples to allow for the general arability of land that is possessed. And now you're conquering the land of your neighbor for the arability of their tracts, not just the development of their provinces. And this also makes playing wide more dynamic and viable, so that raising a tribe into a kingdom in West Africa or Eastern Europe will disadvantage you less because you have a lot more arable land to account for the low development of that territory. And you could make certain decisions to manage the land you control to keep fertility up, such as clearing forests or shrubland to make room for new farmland while letting old fields fallow to regain some of their arability, which was a common practice in many places, setting some territory to be allocated for grazing while others for farming. Some territories, such as Highlands of Scotland, are absolutely worthless for farming at any reasonable scale, but could be used for grazing cattle or sheep. Territory like this could have a modifier that keeps its arability low, limiting your ability to build farms and homesteads in low arable land, but still being able to use that land for grazing. That's good. That's good shit. To add on to this, famine absolutely needs to be a feature in like the game, the way that plague is. Famine and plague were the world's most terrifying power couple for thousands of years, and that's why they're like two of the four horsemen of the apocalypse in Christian canon, presumably holding hands. I imagine that essentially some event will trigger bad harvests, be it locusts, storms, drought, a cold snap, etc. It's not that they're going to be introducing it all under heaven, as they've said. And you, as the Lord, will be alerted that you need to spend money on carting in food to the affected counties, or this could spiral out of control very quickly, causing counties to bleed development as the population flees to other areas, and also spreading the famine as the subsistence economy of other places just can't keep up with the influx of hungry people. And this could shift the development load of your realm. More interestingly, the shift the cultural makeup as regions are depopulated and repopulated by neighboring cultures. Think Norman culture being replaced with Breton as famine causes people in Normandy to flee south and east. And there's like a 33% chance that it repopulates as a Breton culture since it borders a county with Breton culture. It could also allow for interesting cross-border events, where refugees will attempt to cross into other realms as borders were barely existent in many places historically. And as the ruler of a realm, with a neighboring realm suffering a famine, you could invite them in and pay gold to feed them, suffering a tick to popular opinion, but also gaining a 50% reduction in cost of hybridizing with the culture these people came from. You could also gain piety in religions that value compassion and generosity, like Buddhism and Christianity. There's also, of course, a chance that the culture could hop the border, especially if the famine cascades into your realm. The bigger the famine gets, the worse it gets to manage, so early investment is important. It also makes low stewardship and greedy neighbors something of an occupational hazard you have to deal with, since they're more likely to allow these things to spiral out of control due to malice or incompetence. Also, using levies in offensive wars for extended periods of time will increase the chance that famine spawn due to the fact that able-bodied men are besieging a far-off county instead of helping with the harvest, which is why the penalty for offensive war is popular opinion in the first place. Sieges themselves will have a heightened chance to cause famine as well. Naturally, famines increase the chance that plagues will spawn, and plague increases the chance that a famine will spawn. But there are rewards for managing to maintain, or at least good heritability, as feasts will become cheaper to account for the lower demand for food, reducing costs. And you'll probably also get an increase in popular opinion for keeping famine away and keeping food availability high. These periods might also cause development to go up faster and counties to produce more levies while the surplus is active. Keeping account of food could also allow for mechanics around the kind of food that's being grown in a particular region. Food diversity would be very important and dependent on climate and terrain. Greece is naturally going to have a very high level of food diversity with wheat, barley, and rice in traditional Thrace and Macedonia. Macedonia? I don't remember how it's pronounced. But also fish, livestock, and other things besides those things. Regions like Al-Shamar in Arabia are going to struggle with food diversity because you're primarily reliant on date farming and livestock. The higher your food diversity, the lower the cost of feasts, and the lower chance of famine due to there being multiple stopgaps if a singular crop fails or disease spreads through populations of one species of livestock. Wars might also be fought purely with the intent to decimate a realm's ability to produce food in affected counties for a period of time. So even if you lose the war, the people that you fought are still weakened for future engagements, even if the affected county is temporarily less valuable. And keeping this in mind, characters with high learning, have traveled through regions with another crop, or just have the gardener trait with good stewardship could import crops from other regions or pay vassals to adopt them or introduce them through your domain. Dements. We say dements in this house. And you could import peasants who know how to work these crops with a small bump in cost and a -10 or -5 popular opinion for bringing in migrant labor. This also makes it more likely that the project of introducing a new crop will work and be able to spread. Otherwise, a project to introduce rice to the Po Valley may fail without Greek farmers to teach the locals how to grow and harvest the crop. But let's say you live in an area where the land just sucks, that you can only do so much with terraforming. Let's say you're the King or Duke of Scotland. A lot of territory is filled with bogs used by midges for breeding. But your high-learning character went through Greece on a pilgrimage and saw the rice being grown there in wetlands and had an idea. What if you could cultivate a hardy, cold-resistant breed of rice that could be grown in bogs and the marshes of home? It would take a lot of money and learning challenges, but over decades, maybe even multiple generations, you could be able to create this new crop with focused effort, changing the strategic landscape. This means you won't be entirely hobbled when England burns the lowlands where your wheat and barley is grown. You can still fall back on fish, livestock, and bog rice. And these are things like I would like to see as it pertains to stewardship, expansions to realm management, but also like changes I would like to see based on the prompts of what was given in the survey. It was hinted that we might get some changes to theocracy and religion, but also law and adjudication in the future. So here's a few things that I think would make the game like better in the inclusion of those things. Starting with like law and legal cases. In the past, lords were often the judges over legal cases within their jurisdiction. And you could have a system behind royal court where you're settling a case or dispute, and for legalistic cultures, these would be necessary to have before you were allowed to execute or release someone from custody. And with not having a trial being a gain for tyranny or strife, legal cases can be treated like duels or chess battles between different parties that are ultimately settled by the judge, which is the presiding lord or an appointed judge to save themselves the bother of having to go through and oversee all but the most important cases. Two parties will do a series of skill tests where they attempt to sway the judge to their side. Naturally, if you're on the prosecution or defense, you could attempt to sway the result with hooks or outright bribery. The personality of the judge will greatly impact how they carry out justice, with fickle and arbitrary judges being the easiest to sway, and just or stubborn judges being the hardest. Just judges may also be annoying to you if you make a habit of causing trouble for other vassals or characters, since even if the judge themselves like you, they're unlikely to let you off the hook purely for that merit. And if you're a just character, you'll get a huge amount of stress from miscarrying justice. Characters in tribal or steppe governments just have informal adjudications where characters can accuse other characters of wronging them justly or unjustly and ask their liege to intervene. There's a lot more personality dependent for all parties. In feudal or clan governments, it's more normalized for characters to sue each other in an official capacity, and you'll see more of it. But under like bureaucratic regimes like the Byzantines or the Chinese, the law will be your primary method of fighting other estates and families. Players could also appoint judges to adjudicate in their stead, just like any other petty title, but might suffer penalties if these judges are blatantly incompetent or corrupt, beyond reason. Speaking of law, I have a strong feeling that we should have more opportunity for law beyond what is mandated by religion and which pertains to succession. We should have the ability to build unique government styles, which blend elements similar to religions, and we should be able to impose taxes to raise temporary revenue or specific ordinances that raise control, raise popular opinion, etc. In Crusader Kings 2, lunatic characters would occasionally have breakdowns, where they made ridiculous laws that didn't make a whole lot of sense, and they were almost always funny, even if incredibly disadvantageous. So what if we had something similar to that in earnest? Developing a system of common law beyond the standard vassal agreements used in early medieval legal texts like the Magna Carta. Carrying forward into my opinions on how the game treats religion, I want to preface by saying that religion in Crusader Kings 3 is much better than it was in Crusader Kings 2. The team has put a lot of work into improving the game in measurable ways that people have requested before 2020, and I greatly admire the work that they've done to make religion more dynamic and fun. There's just a few notes things that I feel should be changed in religion-focused expansion to the game. Starting with something that like many fans have been asking for and have corrected in mods. 5 tenets instead of 3 would be a huge quality of life change. I understand the need for balance, the desire for religions to be focused. And so I've thought about ways you could limit in certain circumstances. Maybe a small religion starts with 3 tenets, and you unlock a 4th after a certain amount of time, and a 5th with a county's converted requirement. Massively established religions like Catholicism and Asharism just get to have them. But your new heresy has to be more selective. This gives like a feeling of growth and continuity to like your new religions, making them more interesting and challenging to play in a way that they would have been in a historical context. When a religion crosses one of these thresholds, the leader of the faith can select a new tenet after a big event like a synod, where characters gather and influence the outcome the way characters can influence where a crusade will be going. Similar to other activities, the spiritual leader, be they the Pope, the Caliph, the Dalai Lama, or another one, can pay to host the event, and qualified characters can attend. Decentralized faiths are structured in such a way that any ruler or powerful theocratic character can call it as soon as the threshold is met, and they have the resources to do so. If a player character is the head of the faith, they have the ultimate say over what happens, but you'll receive gifts and recommendations by other characters to influence the result, and they'll be very unhappy if they don't get their way. The situation leads into something that has been a problem, at least as I've been playing the game, going on a decade now. The Christian schism between Catholic and Orthodox churches just isn't handled by the game. And I'm not entirely sure why. The schism itself is only 6 years old by the 1060 start date, and a lot of people would just consider themselves to be Christians as opposed to one or the other. With these rulers and theocratic characters adopting one or the other and it being treated as essentially a mass conversion event for all of Europe, the schism was incredibly disruptive, and it should be important in the two start dates where that is relevant. When playing in 887, the Church of Europe should be unified, with the Pope just being the Patriarch of Rome, the first among equals. Even if the real beginnings of the cracks go back to the Lombard invasion of central Italy and the retreat of the Byzantines a century earlier, the churches and the people in it did not see themselves as something fundamentally different until centuries after the schism. For instance, Byzantine collusion in the First Crusade versus the Fourth Crusade 100 years later on the Byzantine Empire itself, even without the support of Rome. Also, please, Paradox, bring back anti-popes. That was a really good mechanic. I miss my anti-popes. I also think there should be an opportunity for randomly generated faiths to appear to allow for more variety than just the same historical heresies that appear in every game. This could be something that you could control in the pregame menu, limiting historical heresies or allowing for new ahistorical ones to develop without your intervention. I would also really like new events focusing on religious festivals and how characters organically interface with their faith. Right now, players are encouraged to build and choose their religions around mechanical advantages, not roleplay. And I think that's tragic. Think, religion-specific event chains that make it feel lived in. Holidays and feast days, letting all Christian characters collect a small piety bonus every year for attending Christmas Mass. And it would be a fun little diversion to break the years up. And a king could declare a new holiday for saints in their bloodline or other things like that. Religions, often without state backing, like Jewish or Zoroastrian or pagan minority enclaves, could receive their own micro-events for adventurers and unlanded characters. Secret worship, interfaith marriage dilemmas, or syncretism choices that could help them feel alive, even in small pockets. Something I've been dying for since the game came out in 2020 was the ability to move holy sites when you create a new religion. It should come with an extra piety cost, but if you're creating Anglicanism 400 years early, you shouldn't have to convert to insularism to get the holy sites you want. You should be able to spend extra piety moving holy sites like Rome and Jerusalem to monasteries in Britain. One could say this is unfair, because it allows you to stack them in one region. But look how that works for the Lithuanians. They get a lot of bonuses. But with all their eggs in one basket, if they lose their heartland, they lose all those bonuses with them. It's a vulnerability to have them in one place, and that balances them. And to move them, after you can only do so by being the head of faith or petitioning your head of faith or spending a ludicrous amount of piety. Finally, there's one more area that I think Crusader Kings 3 has been struggling with for a long time. And I thought this is the thought that actually sparked the whole essay that I wrote, and the reason why I wanted to make this video. So I present Steel and Salt, a warfare expansion. A short while ago, Great holy wars like crusades and jihads were updated so that they could organize effectively, meeting in one central location before traveling to the target land together and breaking up in such a way that all the armies would be adjacent to each other in another barony. This was to fix the long-standing issue of crusades and jihads failing because of a lack of central organization, where all the armies arrived independently and would get divided and killed off by defending forces. In my opinion, the problem was that the defenders had too easy of a time organizing than the attackers having too hard of a time. I am probably the only person who plays the game who actually dislikes the update, because not only is it very historically inaccurate, but more importantly, it makes for bad gameplay if you're the defender against one of these holy wars, where victory becomes nearly impossible. I recently decided that I wanted to get the beta Israel achievement. My mistake. Which involves starting as the Haymanot, a Jewish character in East Africa, controlling a kingdom title and diverging the culture. This is an achievement because not only are you playing as a religious isolate, you're playing in a region with a lot of interfaith conflict that is particularly cruel to religious isolates. The only independent Haymanot ruler in the game in any of the start dates is Mesfin of Gondar in 1060. And to save some unnecessary commentary, I could give a walkthrough if people really want it. I succeeded in capturing the kingdom title of Abyssinia and was on my way to getting the achievement since I just needed prestige to diverge the culture. For that time, my primary rival was Nubia, since one of the Nubian duchies had managed to secure the kingdom of Nubia. And it had turned into quite a large and strong powerhouse to my north, and we'd gone back and forth over northern Ethiopia and South Sudan. However, while we were at war, that war was invalidated by a jihad that had been called against us. The jihad was targeting the Nubian king, even though he only had 3 counties in the kingdom of Abyssinia, whereas I had the rest, and the 12k jihad appeared on my coast, and even when I hired a bunch of mercenaries to get up to 5k troops, and only fought them on terrain that was advantageous to me, like mountains with pikemen and archers, I just couldn't win. Even after abandoning territory to unite with the Nubians. Getting us up to 9k, the Muslims still dominated due to that 3k bonus troops, with Mubarizddin, and the way more Faris and generals. Seriously, why can't your vassals join you in defense in a Great Holy War? Maybe that's changed since I played at the time, but that was a massive pain in the ass. They absolutely joined their lieges historically, because they were going to lose everything too. I was only even able to save the run because I rebooted saves so many times that something invalidated, and I lost the kingdom title and my vassals instead of everything. I got to keep the Duchy of Gondar. If that jihad had been in this older style, I would have had a much better chance, where I could isolate different smaller armies rather than getting death-starred, and by playing smart, I could have actually had a chance to win. And that's what started a line of thought for me. What were Wars and Crusader Kings 3 missing? And I thought about it, and it's a lot. So this remaining session is a DLC pitch to Paradox, if you will, and I'll call it Steel and Salt. I recently read a romance historical erotica named The Scottish Boy by Alex de Campi, which is a period drama set in the early 14th century England, and there's quite a few scenes focusing on medieval warfare and how it would have actually felt to be there and be a commanding presence in these engagements. A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, similarly handled this through, in all honesty, I preferred Campi's depiction of medieval warfare to Martin's. And that's what guided some of my thoughts in how I think this kind of DLC would be structured and what it should contain. To begin, Crusader Kings 3 has a warfare problem. And it has had this problem since at least Crusader Kings 2. Though I suspect the first entry as well, but I admittedly haven't played Crusader Kings 1. The games I've played have always had incredibly focused on roleplay. Crusader Kings, in its bones, shares more in common with Kingdom Come than Europa Universalis. And even if both CK and EU are map painters, I remember someone saying that Crusader Kings is an RPG in map painter clothes, and I find that more than true. So, operating on the idea that Crusader Kings is an RPG, why are wars so boring? Like, think about it. In a game that relies heavily prioritizes character actions and relationships, all that happens in war is that you secure marriage alliances, call your allies, click to muster your troops, and then right-click on a tile with enemy army or castle. As far as strategy goes, you're only considering men-at-arms makeup, terrains, attrition, and army size. In medieval warfare, commanders were balancing the personalities of their underlings as much as the army themselves, because every role in the chain of command had a particular duty to uphold, be they the vanguard, the lieutenant, the rear guard, etc. The personality of an individual lord was going to influence how they fulfilled their duty. In game terms, if you put a craven in the rear guard, they might flee when it looks like the front is collapsing rather than reinforce it. You put someone brave and reckless in the vanguard, they might charge ahead before the rest of the army can support them. And more than that, if two lords hate each other or like each other, that will greatly influence how well they support each other. This also presents a way to deal with the issue of armies splintering and going off on their own on crusader jihad, or any other way that allies, really without having to override their personality, or force them to behave in a smart way that can't be resisted by a defender. Introduce parley. Instead of forcing the AI to always clump in a holy war, rulers have to parley with friendly forces to convince them to perform a certain role or join their camp. And army camps could become locations in the way that tournament camps are, where a bunch of different characters mix and mingle. Say you're in an army of 2k, and your nearby allies is 1k, and the enemy is 3.5k. You both only stand a chance if you can unite your forces. But in CK, the way it is now, you just have to hope that they join you rather than skipping town when the enemy approaches. With this system, you can petition their lord or commander to join your army for a period of a year, let's say, similar to inviting a scheme with bonuses and detractors based on personality. An ambitious character would be more likely to refuse, while a craven would be more likely to agree, seeing that it's safer in numbers. Based on either, you'd have to offer certain rewards to convince some more obstinate parties, just like in schemes. And you could also pressure them to go siege enemy territory or prioritize disrupting supply lines, like I mentioned earlier. And naturally, this could also go the other way, with allies offering rewards like prestige, gold, or hooks, or at least opinion, to join with their army. You could also offer to join a larger army under the command of a different character. And the vast majority of cases they'll agree, but you'll find edge cases where an ambitious character just doesn't want to share the glory, or an arbitrary character just doesn't like you very much, or your rival would rather die on the field than fight by your side. No Lord of the Rings. No Lord of the Rings benefits there. But you could override this obstinacy if you have a positive opinion with their liege, assuming they aren't the liege, and the liege gives them a direct order to cooperate, where they become a criminal if they refuse. Though that situation could be risky for the allied king, or you, in such cases, because giving your army to someone and then declaring them a criminal in need of arrest is a great way to get Julius Caesar. Dealing with a mutiny and a rebellion while you're in an ongoing war, much less one that takes most of your troops, is a very precarious situation to be in. Dread would also play a factor in this, like naturally. Armies functioning like mobile tourney camps or adventurer camps, they could each have their own command structure with appointments that provide specific benefits, just like court jobs. And these could dissolve as soon as the army does. If you don't have enough characters, you could promote from the ranks, generating characters to fill those roles, and they become courtiers when the war is over. You'd also have such positions, you leave them unfilled, but that would leave your army on the back foot if they get attacked, or just don't have a logistician keeping all the supplies moved and the army fed. The locations themselves would have events and character interactions, with friendships blossoming and rivalries erupting. Characters will duel, they'll get drunk together, they'll be doing seduction schemes. Extra fun for bisexual and homosexual characters in the male-centric martial cultures. There could be quarreling, as some of your troops are from different clans or cultures that are feuding or have little in common. Think Austria-Hungary, but in the medieval period, which was more common than you'd think. It was very common among multi-ethnic levies, where not everyone spoke the same language. And a variety of other fun things, just to keep the wars interesting. Naturally, you could set the army to auto-appoint. And most of the events that don't pertain to the army will will only trigger if your character is present. This also means that you need a commander that you can trust to keep the army together, not just win battles. If you're bored of lording in peacetime and you want to get away from court intrigue, wars become a break in the monotony, like with Louis XIV, the Sun King, who on his deathbed claimed that he loved war too much because that was the only time he was getting away from Versailles. And that brings to the next addition regarding more dynamic armies. Many people want to add a battle simulator to Crusader Kings, like Medieval 2, Age of Empires 3, or any entry in the Mount and Blade franchise, and I just don't think these are really compatible with Crusader Kings' gameplay loop for a variety of reasons. The predominant one is that these are entirely different games with different mechanics and focuses. More importantly, they give you as the player far too much control. Not to mention that micromanaging these individual battles in a game like Crusader Kings would be maddening in those other game systems. There's too much going on! That would be a punishment in hell! What I think should happen is a lot simpler. Treat battles like duels are treated in the game. No, really. Like duels. Imagine, you get a series of text-based events where you're opening or responding to what your opponent does, and martial score is your initiative, choosing to seize on it or give it to the opponent. This way you could win battles with stats other than martial. A high learning character may remember specific historical battles. A high intrigue character may use dishonorable or fear-based tactics. A diplomacy-oriented character may convince enemy forces to surrender, or to keep their forces motivated with rousing speeches. The sky is the limit, and to make more diverse characters useful outside of specific context of their focus. You could get actual duels via prowess challenges by enemy champions, and some events could be dependent on certain type and subverted or made worse by personality. Let's say you're attacking an opponent on a forest tile, and naturally they want to defend to give you the initiative. A brave character might barrel ahead into the trees and get ambushed, having to make a series of prowess or intrigue challenges to escape or advance. Whereas a cautious, fickle, or craven lord would be content sending their troops ahead to suss out the ambushes, even with slower progress. Or you could send your men-at-arms forward, risking their strength, or send levies, risking popular opinion and famine, as fewer men will go home to the harvest. Every decision you make will give you positive or negative opinion with the officers in the army based on how they feel about your decision. This allows battles to be truly dynamic in a way that the game already has the tools to enact. Let's return to my example of the jihad earlier. How a battle in that might play out in the new system. Say I'm fighting a losing battle with 5k, but the pikes and archers on a mountain are against a mixed Islamic army of 12k. The vanguard rushes in, and we start repelling them and actually pushing them back. The vanguard calls for reinforcements, but they never come. Because the vanguard is being led by Mohammed bin Salah, ambitious, callous, and brave. His backup is Rashid al-Hijaz, who is also ambitious, deceitful, fickle, and fucking hates his guts. So I get a chance to win a battle I really shouldn't have, because of role-playing related infighting. There might also be cultural conflicts. A person from a culture that has stand and fight will take stress in order to retreat, and it's more likely to wait until the last possible moment. Quarrelsome cultures are more likely to produce commanders who abandon each other on the field to get rid of their rivals or compete for glory, and to the detriment of the overarching strategy. Naturally, there's going to be a lot of disorganization among the mixed army of Muslims on jihad. Many commanders can understand Arabic, but the individual troops levied from across thousands of miles likely don't actually speak the same language and only understand a bit of Arabic, if any. Perhaps army cohesion could be a new thing you'd have to manage, like logistics. And you have to post translators and disciplinary officers to keep cohesion high, but if they die in battle, that could result in a serious problem if you otherwise won the battle handily or escaped with minimal but important losses. Cohesion would likely affect advantage, giving bonuses or penalties similar to supply. An army with low cohesion, an army and supply is essentially a mob. When you have a massive stack, it becomes very difficult to keep a group of keep group cohesion high, even if individual army has decent cohesion, just from the problem that there's 15 different commanders. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. Stewardship oriented characters would be uniquely suited to manage both army cohesion and supply, keeping their armies in tip-top fighting shape, even if they're less versed in the fighting aspect of battles. There could be more unique battle events. Say you're fighting a ruler who took a pretty large amount of debt to finance enough mercenaries to fight you. In battle, you could encounter these mercenaries and see them haggard and very clearly unhappy to see you, be forced to do their job since they're fighting under an IOU. So you could offer them the opportunity to retreat with high diplomacy, or better, if you have gold, you could simply purchase their contract and lead them to a surprise attack on their former allies, with stewardship letting you haggle on the amount actually being given to them. And this makes for truly, memorable events, which is the core, the bread and butter of what Crusader Kings loves to do. Say your character has a high diplomacy and intrigue, speaks the enemy language, and has a good amount of gold. You sneak into the enemy encampment, claiming to be a minor lord that no one has heard of. You bribe your way past the guards into the command tent while an important meeting is going on. Through a series of tests, you listen to their strategy or convince the enemy high command of false information about your army, and propose tactics to deal with your army, claiming that you have knowledge from raids that you've gone on, which is historically plausible. And then, when they dismiss the meeting, you get to sneak away and absolutely dominate the next battle. You could generate a legend seed as a trickster god, especially in polytheistic societies. Get an epithet like the trickster, or at least a way to get the trickster more reliably. It would mean something. You could have unique situations for characters of different genders or sexualities. Gay characters might be able to use seduction on gay characters in the enemy camp with a high intrigue or diplomacy. Women would have the benefit of being consistently underestimated by men of patriarchal cultures who aren't cynical. A lady could do the same plot, but either pose as a man or sneak in as a serving girl, focusing on overhearing the strategy. But a truly godlike intrigue character could just poison them all with the wine that she brings. I think these features would make, what is currently the most boring and procedural part of Crusader Kings one of the more interesting features. And one where you may even want to declare wars, just for the unique experience of being at war. And that's all, the meaningful additions I think adding to this ever-growing list. And I love feedback from other people, who think of these ideas and situations and things that you guys would want to add. And situations that I imagine might emerge, that you guys might imagine might emerge from mechanics like this. And I do, truly hope a representative of Paradox or the Crusader Kings team views this. It takes inspiration. A dedicated veteran of the game like myself would be absolutely delighted for any individual case of one of these. And I think that's all I had for a video today. Like I mentioned before, if you guys have any thoughts or just something you wanted to share, please do so. And put it in the comment section. Share, subscribe. Appreciate it. Normal YouTuber shit. See ya.